The mahogany desk trembled under Olivia Hawthorne's white-knuckled grip. "He walked out on Mr. Peterson," her assistant's voice sliced through the silence of her corner office. 30 minutes into the session. Below, autumn shadows stretched across Millbrook Academy's pristine courtyard, where her 9-year-old son sat motionless on cold stone. Dylan's designer backpack lay abandoned beside him like a discarded promise. 10 tutors, Harvard doctorates, Princeton specialists. $150,000 dissolved into nothing, and still her brilliant boy recoiled from every number on every page. But as Olivia watched, Dylan rose with sudden purpose. He bypassed the waiting Mercedes, slipped past the bronze-uniformed security guard, and disappeared into her own building through the service entrance. The elevator's red light blinked once as it descended into the basement's darkness. Somewhere in those concrete depths lay the answer to a question that had haunted every sleepless night. What could touch her unreachable child? 3 floors beneath Olivia's corner office, Ben Carter squeezed disinfectant onto his mop for the final time that night. The industrial clock above the janitor's closet read 11:47. In 3 hours, his 8-year-old son Lucas would wake up for school, and Ben needed to be home before then. He pulled a wrinkled worksheet from his shirt pocket. Second-grade addition problems that Lucas had started but couldn't finish. The boy was too shy to ask his teacher for help, too proud to admit confusion to his classmates. Ben folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into his pocket next to Sarah's hospital bill. 18 months since cancer took his wife. 18 months of working night shifts to avoid the pitying looks that came with daylight. The debt collector's latest notice was paper-clipped to his employee badge. $47,000 remaining. Lucas needed him to stay at this job, in this building, earning every dollar that kept their small apartment and put food on their table. He opened his metal locker and retrieved his thin jacket. Inside the pocket, Lucas's homework waited alongside a faded photo of Sarah holding their newborn son. Ben touched the picture's edge with calloused fingers before closing the locker door. Tomorrow he would find time to teach Lucas those addition problems. Tomorrow he would be the father Sarah believed he could be. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ben pushed his cart toward the storage room. In the distance, elevator cables hummed with movement. Someone was coming down to the basement at this hour, probably security making their midnight rounds. Ben hurried to finish his work, invisible as always, just the way he preferred it. Dylan Hawthorne stepped out of the service elevator into a world he'd never seen. The basement smelled of cleaning chemicals and recycled air. Emergency lighting cast long shadows between concrete pillars, and somewhere in the distance, wheels squeaked against polished floor. He pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering against his ribs. This was stupid. He should go back upstairs, face another lecture about responsibility and living up to his potential. But the sound drew him forward. Soft voice. Patient tone. Someone was teaching down here in the bowels of his mother's corporate empire. Dylan crept toward the sound, staying close to the shadows, until he could see around the pillar's edge. A man in blue coveralls sat on an overturned plastic crate, holding a piece of cardboard covered in hand-drawn numbers. Across from him, a blond boy about Dylan's age perched on another crate, pencil in hand. If Johnny has 12 pieces of candy and gives away 4, how many does Johnny have left? The man's voice was gentle, nothing like the impatient tutors who checked their watches every few minutes. The boy, Lucas, according to the whispered conversation Dylan caught, screwed up his face in concentration. No pressure, no sighs of disappointment, just patience floating in the recycled air. 8! Lucas thrust his hand up like he'd discovered gold. Johnny has 8 pieces left! The man, Ben, his name tag read, smiled with genuine pride. Not the forced enthusiasm Dylan knew from his expensive tutors, but real joy at a child's success. Dylan found himself leaning forward, drawn to something he couldn't name. When was the last time someone had looked at him like that? Ben was already writing the next problem when he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. A small figure pressed against the concrete pillar, watching. Ben's hand stilled on the cardboard. Company policy was crystal clear about unauthorized personnel in the basement, especially children. But something about the boy's posture, the careful way he held himself, the longing in his shadowed face, made Ben hesitate. "You can come out," Ben said quietly. "I won't hurt you." Dylan stepped into the light, expensive clothes and nervous energy marking him as someone who didn't belong in this industrial space. Ben studied the boy's face and felt recognition click into place. Those were Olivia Hawthorne's eyes, her stubborn jawline, her restless intelligence. The CEO's son was hiding in his basement classroom. "I just wanted to listen," Dylan said, voice barely above a whisper. Lucas looked between his father and the strange boy, uncertain. Ben weighed his options. One word to security and Dylan would disappear forever. One report to management and Ben would lose his job. But the boy's eyes held something Ben recognized from his own childhood, the desperate hunger for someone to understand. "Just for tonight," Ben said finally. "Then you go back where you belong." Dylan nodded quickly and settled onto the concrete floor, back against the pillar. Ben returned to the cardboard, but his teaching took on new energy. He found himself explaining concepts more clearly, demonstrating with bottle caps and marker lines, making sure both boys could follow along. For the first time in months, Dylan Hawthorne listened to a math lesson without checking the clock. For the first time in years, Ben Carter felt like a real teacher again. And somewhere 12 floors above, Olivia stared at her reflection in the office window, wondering where her son had learned to disappear so completely. The next evening, Dylan returned. Ben should have sent him away, should have called security, reported the incident, protected his job. Instead, he found himself setting up 3 crates in the basement corner, arranging bottle caps into neat rows for counting exercises. Lucas chattered excitedly about having a classmate, while Dylan sat quietly, absorbing every word like a plant finally receiving sunlight. By Friday of that first week, Dylan was completing math problems that had stumped him for months. Not because the work was easier, but because someone finally believed he could do it. Ben never rushed, never showed frustration, never compared Dylan to other students. He simply taught, with the kind of patience that could only come from a father who understood what it meant to watch a child struggle. "Mr. Ben," Dylan said as they packed up the makeshift classroom on Friday night, "why don't you teach at a real school?" Ben's hand stilled on the cardboard. Lucas looked up from organizing bottle caps, sensing the weight of the question. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, marking time in a space where time seemed suspended. "Teaching requires things I don't have," Ben said carefully. Dylan tilted his head, studying Ben's face in the harsh basement lighting. Something passed between them, an understanding that some dreams get buried under necessity, that some gifts go unrecognized by the world above. But Dylan was 9 years old, and 9-year-olds believe in impossible things. Over the following 2 weeks, their basement routine solidified into something that felt almost normal. Dylan would slip away during his tutoring sessions upstairs, claiming bathroom breaks or sudden headaches. His real education happened in the building's depths, where cardboard became blackboards and bottle caps became mathematical revelations. Lucas and Dylan developed the easy friendship of children who share secrets, while Ben discovered that teaching 2 students was somehow easier than teaching 1. Dylan's math grades began to improve, not dramatically. Ben was careful to suggest Dylan should still struggle occasionally to avoid suspicion. But slowly, steadily, the boy who had been failing second-grade arithmetic was mastering concepts that had defeated 10 professional tutors. Olivia attributed the progress to Mr. Peterson's breakthrough techniques and increased the Harvard PhD's fee accordingly. Mum thinks you're finally working with Peterson, Dylan told Ben one evening in early October. They were sitting in their usual circle, working through multiplication tables with hand-drawn grids. She's planning to hire him full-time next semester. Ben's marker paused over the cardboard. Lucas looked between the adults, sensing tension he couldn't understand. What did you tell her? Ben asked. Dylan shrugged, the casual gesture of a child who had learned to navigate adult expectations. Nothing. She doesn't ask about the actual math, just the grades. The truth of that statement hung in the recycled air. Ben had never met Olivia Hawthorne, but he was beginning to understand her through the careful way Dylan spoke about their interactions. The first crack in their perfect secret came on a Monday morning in early October. Kevin Morrison, son of Hawthorne Tech's chief financial officer, spotted Dylan near the service elevator during lunch break. Kevin was the kind of boy who collected information like ammunition, storing it until the moment of maximum impact. He followed Dylan at a distance, noted the basement destination, and filed the intelligence away for future use. Dylan Hawthorne learns math in the basement, Kevin announced to a table full of classmates during lunch on Wednesday. With the janitor. The words carried across the cafeteria like poison in clear water. Within hours, every student at Millbrook Academy knew that the CEO's son was getting tutored by building maintenance. The jokes wrote themselves. Basement education, janitor math, corporate charity case. Dylan came home that afternoon with scraped knuckles and grass stains on his uniform. He locked himself in his room and refused dinner, refused conversation, refused everything except the mathematics homework he completed with sudden, violent precision. Olivia stood outside his door, listening to pencil scratching against paper with unusual intensity, and felt the first stir of genuine worry. Not about grades or test scores, but about the son she was realizing she barely knew. Mrs. Hawthorne, the school counselor called Friday morning. I'm concerned about Dylan's recent behavior. He seems withdrawn, defensive. Has anything changed at home? Olivia gripped her phone, staring at the quarterly reports spread across her desk. Everything was changing at home, but she couldn't identify what. Dylan's grades were improving, but his spirit seemed to be dimming. That evening, Dylan almost didn't go to the basement. He stood by the service elevator for 10 minutes, thumb hovering over the button, Kevin Morrison's laughter echoing in his memory. But then he thought about Ben's patient voice, Lucas's excited explanations, the way mathematics made sense when someone believed you could understand it. The elevator doors opened, and Dylan stepped inside. I thought you weren't coming, Lucas said when Dylan appeared in their concrete classroom. Ben looked up from arranging bottle caps, and Dylan caught something in the man's expression, relief mixed with concern. Everything okay, son? Dylan nodded quickly, settling onto his crate, but Ben's experienced father's eye caught the tension in the boy's shoulders. They worked through fraction problems in unusual quiet that night. Dylan's responses were correct but mechanical, lacking the enthusiasm that had marked their previous sessions. When Ben asked if he wanted to try a challenging problem, Dylan shook his head. I'm tired, he said, though it was only 8:30. Lucas glanced between his father and their friend, sensing the shift in dynamics. Dylan, Ben said as they cleaned up, if something's bothering you, you can talk about it. Dylan looked up sharply. None of his expensive tutors had ever offered that kind of opening. They dealt in equations and formulas, not emotions and complications. But Ben was looking at him the way fathers look at sons, not as problems to be solved, but as people worth understanding. It's nothing, Dylan said finally. But as he headed toward the elevator, he turned back. Mr. Ben, do you ever wish things were different? Ben considered the question, bottle caps clicking together in his palm. Different how? Dylan's gaze dropped to the concrete floor. Different so that good things weren't embarrassing. The elevator doors closed before Ben could respond, leaving him and Lucas alone in their basement sanctuary. "Dad," Lucas said quietly, "Dylan seemed sad tonight." Ben nodded, still staring at the closed elevator doors. He was beginning to understand that their secret classroom existed in a complicated world where the wrong kind of help could feel like humiliation. By the third week of October, Dylan's internal conflict had reached a breaking point. The basement mathematics made sense, but the social mathematics of fourth grade were becoming impossible to navigate. He dreaded lunch periods, avoided group projects, and spent recess hiding in the library. His improvement in math class only made things worse. Classmates whispered about janitor coaching every time he answered a question correctly. On Wednesday, October 18th, Dylan made a decision. He would stop going to the basement. He would accept failing grades, disappointed tutors, and his mother's frustrated lectures. At least then, Kevin Morrison would find someone else to target. At least then, he could eat lunch without whispered commentary about basement education and charity cases. Ben and Lucas waited until 9:15 that night before accepting that Dylan wasn't coming. They worked through Lucas's homework in unusual quiet, both aware of the empty crate where their friend usually sat. "Maybe he's sick," Lucas suggested hopefully. Ben nodded, but something cold was settling in his stomach. He recognized abandonment when it happened, had felt it enough times in his own life. Thursday brought the same absence. Friday, Ben found himself checking the elevator every few minutes, listening for the distinctive hum of its descent. Lucas grew increasingly worried, asking if they had done something wrong, if Dylan was mad at them. Ben had no answers. Only the growing certainty that their secret world was collapsing under pressures he hadn't anticipated. But Friday afternoon, as Dylan sat alone in the school courtyard watching other children board buses and luxury cars, Lucas appeared beside him. The younger boy climbed onto the stone bench without invitation, swinging his legs with 8-year-old determination. "Why aren't you coming to class anymore?" Lucas asked directly. Dylan stared at his expensive shoes. "I'm busy." The lie sat heavy between them. "Dad thinks he did something wrong." Lucas continued. "He's been cleaning the same spot for like an hour every night, waiting." Dylan glanced at Lucas, caught by the image of Ben waiting in the empty basement. "He didn't do anything wrong." Lucas nodded as if he'd known this all along. "Then why won't you come back?" Dylan found himself telling Lucas about Kevin Morrison, about whispered jokes and playground humiliation. Lucas listened with the serious attention of a child who had learned that adult problems sometimes spilled into kid territory. When Dylan finished, Lucas was quiet for a long moment, processing information beyond his years. "You know," Lucas said finally, "my dad used to be really smart in school. Mom told me he got a scholarship to college." Dylan looked up, surprised. This was the first time Lucas had mentioned details about Ben's past. "But when Mom got sick, Dad had to quit school to take care of us. He doesn't regret it, though, because he says family is more important than anything else." "Why are you telling me this?" Dylan asked. Lucas shrugged, the gesture more profound than casual. "Because you're the first person who treats my dad like a real teacher. That makes him happy." The words hit Dylan like a physical blow. He thought about Ben's patient explanations, the way the man's face lit up when either boy mastered a difficult concept, the careful way he prepared their cardboard lessons. "Lucas," Dylan said slowly, "your dad is the best teacher I've ever had." Lucas grinned, legs swinging faster. "I know. So why are you letting stupid Kevin Morrison ruin it?" The question was simple, direct, and impossible to answer with anything but honesty. Dylan looked across the courtyard at the building where Ben was probably cleaning floors and wondering what he'd done wrong. That evening, Dylan returned to the basement. Ben's face when he stepped out of the elevator was worth every whispered insult Kevin Morrison could devise. "Thought you might not come back," Ben said simply. Dylan nodded, settling onto his familiar crate. I thought about it. They worked through polynomial basics that night, the mathematics feeling like coming home after a long, cold journey. But their secret couldn't last forever. By the final week of October, Olivia's patience with Dylan's mysterious behavior had evaporated completely. Private investigators, security camera reviews, detailed questioning of every staff member who had contact with her son. The reports came back frustratingly vague. Dylan disappeared somewhere in the building between 8 and 9 every evening, but surveillance footage showed no trace of him. It's impossible, the lead investigator explained over the phone. The boy vanishes between the 7th and basement floors. Either your cameras have blind spots, or he's learned to avoid them completely. Olivia stared at the building schematics spread across her desk. Every floor was monitored, every entrance covered. Where could a 9-year-old boy hide for an hour each night? The answer came on Monday, October 23rd, when Olivia decided to conduct her own investigation. She cancelled her board meeting, dismissed her assistant early, and positioned herself in the lobby with clear sight lines to all elevator access points. At 8:25, Dylan emerged from the restroom and walked casually toward the service elevator. No furtive glances, no nervous behavior. He pressed the basement button with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Olivia waited 5 minutes before following. The basement level was foreign territory. She hadn't been down here since the building's construction 7 years ago. Emergency lighting created a maze of shadows and concrete pillars. She moved carefully in her heels, following the sound of voices toward the building's eastern corner. What she heard made her freeze behind a pillar, hardly daring to breathe. "Excellent work, Dylan. Now try the harder one." A man's voice, warm with encouragement. 12 times 11 equals what? Dylan's voice, confident and engaged in a way Olivia hadn't heard in months. 132, because 12 times 10 is 120, and 12 times 1 is 12, so you add them together. Applause from a younger voice, another child celebrating Dylan's success. Olivia peered around the pillar's edge and felt her world tilt sideways. Her son, the boy who sat silent and sullen through sessions with Harvard PhD, was perched on a plastic crate in a circle of improvised education. The classroom consisted of cardboard propped against the wall, plastic bottles arranged for counting, and marker-drawn charts that looked nothing like the sophisticated materials she'd purchased for his expensive tutors. But Dylan was engaged, completely, utterly, joyfully engaged. He raised his hand to answer questions, helped the younger boy with difficult concepts, and smiled with genuine pleasure when he solved problems correctly. The man teaching them wore a maintenance uniform and had calloused hands, but he explained mathematical concepts with clarity that none of Dylan's credentialed tutors had achieved. "Good thinking," Ben was saying. "Now, Dylan, can you show Lucas how you figured that out?" Dylan slid off his crate and approached the cardboard board, taking the marker with confidence Olivia had never seen him display in any academic setting. He drew circles and lines, explaining his thought process to Lucas with the patience of someone who had learned to value understanding over speed. Olivia pressed her back against the concrete pillar, mind reeling. Everything she thought she knew about her son was wrong. Dylan wasn't learning disabled or lazy or stubborn. He was brilliant. But he needed teaching that honored his intelligence rather than demanding it prove itself through standardized methods. And this janitor, this man she'd probably passed in hallways without seeing, was providing something that $150,000 couldn't buy. "Mr. Ben," Dylan said as they began cleaning up their materials, "can I ask you something not about math?" Ben nodded, capping his marker with careful attention. "Why don't you get mad when I make mistakes?" The question hung in the recycled air like a prayer. Ben sat back on his crate, considering his words. "Why would I get mad?" Dylan looked down at his hands. "My old tutors always sighed when I didn't understand. They said I was smart, but not focused." Ben's expression shifted, and Olivia caught a flash of something protective in his eyes. "What do you think about that?" he asked gently. "I think maybe I really am stupid," Dylan whispered. The words hit Olivia like physical blows. She had no idea her son felt this way, no idea that her expensive educational interventions had convinced him of his own inadequacy. Ben reached across the small circle and placed his hand on Dylan's shoulder. "Dylan," Ben said, voice steady and sure. "I want to tell you about when Lucas first learned to write letters. It took him 3 months to master the letter A. I didn't get frustrated, because I knew his brain was learning how to do something completely new. Like muscles, the more you exercise your brain, the stronger it gets." Ben turned to face Dylan directly. "Your brain is excellent. You just haven't had anyone teach you how to use it properly." Dylan looked up, hope flickering in his expression. "What's the proper way?" Ben smiled. Slowly, patiently, without pressure. And most importantly, allowing yourself to be wrong while you learn. Olivia felt tears threatening as she listened. This was the conversation she should have had with Dylan months ago, the understanding she should have provided instead of hiring increasingly expensive experts to solve a problem that required love, not credentials. "Mr. Ben," Dylan continued, "do you have kids of your own? You understand children so well." Ben glanced at Lucas, who was organizing their materials with careful attention. "I have Lucas, and I used to be like you, smart, but without anyone who knew how to teach me." Dylan's eyes widened. "Really?" Ben nodded. "I got a college scholarship, but the professors only paid attention to students who were already succeeding. I had to learn how to learn. Took years to figure it out." Olivia's breath caught. Ben had attended college? This man scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans had once been a scholarship student? "But now you do this work." Dylan gestured around the basement. Ben's expression grew complicated, layers of story Olivia couldn't read from her hiding place behind concrete. "Life changes, Dylan. My wife got sick. I needed money for medical bills. After she died, I wanted to stay close to Lucas." Dylan absorbed this information with the seriousness of a child learning that adults face impossible choices. "Do you ever regret it?" Ben was quiet for a long moment, hand resting on Lucas's shoulder. "Sometimes, but then I look at Lucas. And now you. I know I'm doing important work." Dylan leaned forward. "Important how?" Ben's smile was soft but certain. "Teaching a child to feel confident is more important than teaching them 100 formulas." Dylan nodded slowly, then asked the question that would change everything. "Could you teach me forever?" Both Ben and Lucas turned to stare at him. "What do you mean?" Dylan's words came in a rush. "I don't want tutors anymore. I only want to learn with you." Olivia gripped the concrete pillar, heart hammering. This was the moment she'd been hoping for, Dylan actively wanting to learn. But from a janitor in a basement, using cardboard and bottle caps, in direct contradiction of everything she thought she knew about proper education. "Dylan," Ben said carefully, "I'm just a maintenance worker. You need teachers with real credentials." Dylan's voice grew stronger. "I don't care about credentials. I care about who actually wants to teach me." Ben fell silent, the weight of the boy's trust settling around him like responsibility he wasn't sure he could carry. "Dad," Lucas whispered, "could you keep teaching Dylan?" Ben looked at his son, then at Dylan, then at the cardboard classroom they'd built together in stolen hours. "It's not that simple, boys." Lucas tilted his head. "Why not?" Ben couldn't explain about job security, about class boundaries, about the impossibility of their situation without destroying something precious. "We'll figure it out," he said finally. though he had no idea how. Dylan's smile was radiant, the first truly happy expression Olivia had seen on her son's face in months. She slipped away from her hiding place and made her way back to the elevator, mind spinning with everything she'd witnessed. Her son was happy, learning, thriving, with a man she'd never noticed, in a space she'd never considered, using methods she'd never imagined. Back in her office, Olivia sat in darkness, staring at the invoices from Dylan's failed tutors. Harvard Business School had taught her to solve problems with money and expertise. But watching Dylan in that basement classroom, she understood that some problems required different solutions entirely. Her phone buzzed with messages from investors, board members, department heads. The corporate machine demanded attention, decisions, leadership. But for the first time in years, Olivia Hawthorne ignored it all. The next morning, she called an emergency board meeting. "I want to implement an employee education program," she announced to surprised executives. "Scholarships, professional development, advancement opportunities based on actual ability rather than existing credentials." CFO Morrison shifted in his leather chair. "The cost would be substantial." "We just spent $200 million on marketing campaigns," Olivia replied. "I think investing in our people matters more." The room fell silent. This wasn't the Olivia they knew, the woman who measured everything by quarterly profit margins and shareholder value. Morrison exchanged glances with other board members, clearly wondering what had prompted this sudden humanitarian interest. "Is there a specific catalyst for this proposal?" Morrison asked. Olivia met his gaze steadily. "I've realized we're wasting talent." The meeting adjourned with cautious approval for further research into educational partnerships. Olivia returned to her office and spent the rest of the day researching teaching certification programs, community college partnerships, and corporate scholarship initiatives. That afternoon, she went looking for Ben Carter. She found him refilling soap dispensers in the third-floor washroom, working with the methodical efficiency of someone who took pride in invisible labor. "Excuse me," she said from the doorway. Ben turned, recognized her immediately, and straightened to attention. "Mrs. Hawthorne, is there a problem?" "I'm Olivia, and yes, there's a problem." Ben's grip tightened on the soap dispenser, preparing for termination, lawsuits, police involvement. "I know about Dylan." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Ben set down his supplies and faced her directly, shoulders squared despite the obvious power imbalance. "I'll clean out my locker tonight," he said quietly. Olivia shook her head. "I don't want you to quit. I want to understand." Ben studied her face, looking for trapdoors and ulterior motives. Finding only genuine confusion, he gestured toward two plastic chairs near the window. "Then we should talk." They sat in the afternoon sunlight, CEO and Janitor, both parents struggling with children they loved but didn't always understand. "Dylan has never wanted to learn math," Olivia began. "I've hired the best tutors money can buy." Ben nodded. "I know." The simple acknowledgement carried no judgment, no criticism, just recognition of a shared difficulty. "But with you, he's completely different." Ben shifted in his plastic chair. "Dylan is smart. He just needs someone who believes that." Olivia leaned forward. "Why couldn't the others make him believe it?" Ben was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "They treated Dylan like a project to complete, not a person to understand." The truth of that statement cut deep. Olivia thought about her conversations with tutors, always focused on progress reports and milestone achievements, never on whether Dylan felt supported or valued as a learner. "What about me?" she asked. "What did I do wrong?" Ben met her eyes directly. "You love Dylan, but you don't have time to love him." The words were gentle but devastating. Olivia felt them settle into places she'd been avoiding, spaces where maternal guilt had been growing like infection. I work to create a good future for him. Ben nodded, understanding. But he needs you in his present. They talked for an hour, two parents discovering they had more in common than their circumstances suggested. Both were single parents carrying heavy responsibility. Both were trying to give their children advantages they themselves had never had. Both were learning that good intentions didn't automatically translate into good outcomes. Ben, Olivia said, as their conversation wound down, would you be willing to continue teaching Dylan? I mean, officially. I could arrange compensation. Ben shook his head immediately. If you pay me, it becomes a job. I teach Dylan because I enjoy teaching. Then what can I do? Olivia asked. Ben considered this, watching afternoon light slant through the washroom window. Join us. Come down to the basement tonight. Sit with us. Don't be the CEO. Be Dylan's mother. Olivia felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of control she'd held too tightly for too long. I don't know anything about math. Ben's smile was gentle. Then learn with your son. Dylan would love to teach you. That evening, Olivia Hawthorne took the service elevator to the basement for the first time in 7 years. She found Ben setting up their circle of crates, Dylan and Lucas arranging bottle caps with the efficiency of established routine. When Dylan saw her, his expression cycled through surprise, embarrassment, and something that might have been hope. Mom? Dylan stood slowly, uncertain. Olivia looked around their concrete classroom. Cardboard blackboard, plastic bottle manipulatives, marker-drawn charts that represented more effective education than anything in Dylan's expensive private school. I came to learn, she said simply. Ben gestured to a fourth crate he'd positioned in their circle. We're working on division tonight, basic concepts. Olivia sat down carefully, her business suit incongruous among the industrial surroundings. Dylan stared at her, still processing the impossibility of his mother in his secret space. You really want to learn math? He asked. I want to learn how you learn, Olivia replied. The distinction mattered more than she'd realized. For the next hour, she struggled with concepts that had seemed simple when she'd reviewed Dylan's homework from a distance. But working through problems herself, with Dylan patiently explaining techniques Ben had taught him, she began to understand the difference between knowing mathematics and understanding how to learn it. Mom, Dylan said as they cleaned up. You're actually pretty good at this. Olivia smiled, feeling genuine accomplishment for the first time in months. Not from closing deals or managing corporate strategy, but from successfully dividing 48 by 6 with her son's encouragement. The basement classroom had become a space where different kinds of intelligence mattered. Over the following weeks, an unusual routine developed. Olivia would finish her corporate responsibilities by 8 p.m., take the service elevator to the basement, and spend an hour learning alongside Dylan and Lucas. Ben taught them all with equal patience, never making Olivia feel foolish for asking elementary questions, never rushing when she needed time to understand. Dylan blossomed in this environment. Having his mother as a fellow student rather than an external judge transformed their relationship completely. He began sharing mathematical insights with Olivia, explaining concepts he'd learned from Ben, taking pride in his ability to help her when she struggled with difficult problems. For the first time since his father's death when Dylan was 3, he felt like an essential part of a family unit. Ben, Olivia said one evening in mid-November, after Dylan and Lucas had gone to organize their materials. Dylan asked me something interesting yesterday. Ben looked up from erasing their cardboard board. What did he ask? Olivia chose her words carefully. He wanted to know if I could help you become a real teacher. The marker slipped from Ben's fingers, clattering onto the concrete floor. He said that? Olivia nodded. He thinks you're wasted as a janitor. And honestly, after watching you teach for 3 weeks, I think he's right. Ben bent to retrieve his marker, buying time to process this unexpected development. "I appreciate the thought," he said finally, "but I can't afford to go back to school. Lucas needs stability, and this job provides health insurance." Olivia had anticipated this response. She'd spent weeks researching corporate education programs, scholarship opportunities, flexible scheduling arrangements. "What if those obstacles were removed?" Ben straightened slowly. "What do you mean?" Olivia pulled a folder from her briefcase. Research she'd compiled on teaching certification programs that could be completed part-time, corporate partnerships with local colleges, scholarship funds that could cover tuition and living expenses during the transition period. "I mean, what if Hawthorne Tech invested in your education the way I should have invested in Dylan's from the beginning?" Ben stared at the folder without opening it. "This is charity." Olivia shook her head firmly. "This is recognizing talent that's been overlooked. You're already teaching at a level that surpasses credentialed professionals. The certification would just make it official." Lucas appeared at Ben's elbow, having overheard more of the conversation than either adult realized. "Dad," he said quietly, "remember what you told Dylan about dreams that get buried under necessity?" Ben looked down at his son. 8 years old, but wise in ways that broke and mended hearts simultaneously. "You think I should try?" "I think you should do what makes you happy," Lucas replied. "And you're happiest when you're teaching." Dylan joined them, having sensed the weight of the conversation from across their concrete classroom. "Mr. Ben, if you became a real teacher, you could help lots of kids like me and Lucas." Ben looked around their circle. At Lucas, who believed his father could do anything. At Dylan, whose academic confidence had been rebuilt from nothing in this basement space. At Olivia, who had traded corporate power for the vulnerability of learning alongside her son. The folder in his hands felt simultaneously heavy and weightless, full of possibilities he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. "I need time to think," he said finally. Olivia nodded. "Take all the time you need. The offer isn't going anywhere." As they prepared to leave their basement classroom, Dylan tugged on Ben's sleeve. "Whatever you decide, you'll always be my first real teacher." Ben's throat tightened with emotions he couldn't express in words. Some gifts were too profound for language. 3 months later, the basement of Hawthorne Tech had been transformed. Proper tables replaced plastic crates. Real chairs supported small backs and long legs. A whiteboard mounted to the wall displayed mathematical concepts in neat, professional script. But Ben had kept his original cardboard sign, mounting it beside the whiteboard like a reminder of humble beginnings. Olivia sat at one of the small tables, pencil in hand, working through algebra problems that would have seemed impossible 4 months earlier. Dylan sat beside her, patient and encouraging when she struggled with quadratic equations. Lucas had appointed himself head teaching assistant, organizing materials and keeping track of homework assignments. 3 additional students had joined their evening sessions, children whose parents had heard whispered stories about the basement classroom where learning felt like discovery rather than obligation. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Kevin Morrison said from his seat at the second table, "I think I understand variables now." Olivia looked up from her own worksheet, amazed by the transformation in the boy who had once tormented Dylan about their unconventional education. Kevin's parents had eventually requested inclusion in the program after his grades began suffering from guilt about his bullying behavior. Ben moved between the tables, offering guidance and encouragement with the natural authority of someone who had found his calling. The teaching certification program would take 2 more years to complete, but he was already demonstrating capabilities that surpassed many credentialed educators. The basement classroom had become proof that effective teaching required heart more than degrees. "Dad," Lucas called from the whiteboard where he was demonstrating fraction concepts to the newer students, "can you check if I'm explaining this right?" Ben approached his son with visible pride. Lucas had gained confidence and leadership skills through his role as teaching assistant, discovering that he could help others learn just as his father helped him. "Perfect explanation," Ben confirmed. "You're ready to teach the advanced group next week." Lucas beamed with accomplishment that had nothing to do with grades or test scores and everything to do with genuine contribution to others' learning. Dylan watched this interaction with satisfaction, remembering his first night in the basement when he'd felt like an intruder in their father-son bond. As their evening session concluded, the small group cleaned up with practiced efficiency. Olivia found herself working alongside Ben. Their movements synchronized like partners who had learned each other's rhythms through weeks of shared routine. Dylan and Lucas chatted about tomorrow's school science fair, both excited to apply mathematical concepts they'd learned in their basement laboratory. "Ben," Olivia said quietly as they stored materials in organized cabinets, "thank you, not just for teaching Dylan, for teaching me." Ben smiled, the expression carrying warmth that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with genuine friendship. "Olivia, thank you for trusting me with your son. I should be thanking you for seeing what I missed." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Dylan explain geometry concepts to Kevin with enthusiasm that would have been impossible to imagine 4 months earlier. The boy who had once refused to open textbooks was now eager to share mathematical discoveries with former enemies. They rode the elevator together, Dylan, Lucas, Ben, and Olivia, an unlikely family forged in basement shadows and bound by shared commitment to learning. As the doors opened to reveal the bright lobby, Ben caught their reflection in the polished steel. 4 people who had found each other in the most unexpected circumstances, creating something beautiful from broken pieces. Outside the building, Dylan ran ahead with Lucas, both boys animated by plans for next week's lessons. Ben and Olivia walked behind, their conversation flowing with the ease of old friends. "You know," Dylan called over his shoulder, "next week I want to invite more kids from school. Tommy Chen is struggling with fractions, and Maria Silva could really use help with word problems." Ben looked to Olivia for confirmation. She nodded, feeling joy spread through her chest like warmth. "The more the merrier," she said, "but only if they really want to learn." Dylan grinned, the expression transforming his face completely. "Trust me, Mom. Once they meet Mr. Ben, they'll want to learn." As they reached the parking garage, Dylan surprised everyone by wrapping his arms around Ben in a spontaneous hug. "I love you, Mr. Ben." Ben's voice was thick when he replied, "I love you too, kiddo." Lucas immediately joined the embrace, followed by Olivia, who found herself part of a group hug that felt more like family than anything she'd experienced in years. They separated slowly, reluctant to end the moment. Dylan climbed into the Mercedes with his mother, waving goodbye to Lucas and Ben as they walked toward their modest sedan. Olivia watched them in her rearview mirror, father and son talking animatedly about tomorrow's lesson plans, their bond strengthened by the expansion of their small classroom family. "Mom," Dylan said as they drove through Millbrook's quiet streets, "do you think Mr. Ben will really become a teacher?" Olivia glanced at her son in the rearview mirror. His face was soft with hope, free from the anxiety that had marked their relationship for so long. "I think Mr. Ben is already a teacher. The certification will just make it official." Dylan nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Good, because he's the best teacher I've ever had." Olivia smiled, remembering her own struggles with basic arithmetic in their basement classroom, the patience Ben had shown when she couldn't grasp simple concepts, the pride in Dylan's voice when he'd helped her solve her first quadratic equation. "You know what?" she said. "He's the best teacher I've ever had too." They drove home through the Connecticut evening, mother and son connected by shared learning and mutual respect, their conversation flowing with the naturalness of people who had finally found their way back to each other. The basement lights stayed on longer that night, Ben and Lucas reviewing lesson plans for an expanding student body. What had started as a father teaching his son had grown into something neither had imagined possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to prove that the best education happened when teachers cared more about understanding than credentials. And somewhere in her executive suite, Olivia Hawthorne filed away the last invoice from Dylan's expensive tutors. She wouldn't be needing their services anymore. Her son had found his teacher, and she had found her way back to being his mother.